Okay, welcome everyone. It's 9 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. This is Kim Felstead from Park City Transit, and welcome to the April 21st JTAB meeting. I believe it's our first virtual meeting, so be patient with me. Appreciate that. And can everybody hear okay and see the packet? And give a thumbs up. Okay, great. Looks like we got everybody connected right now. If you would remember to mute your microphone when you're not talking, that will help us with the quality. And with that, go ahead and start our meeting with roll call. Cindy, if you would do the roll call for us, please.
Good morning. I'm Cindy Stockley. I'm with Transit. I'm going to go through the roll call. If I miss anybody, will you please let me know? We have Andrew Stevenson from Transit, Jerry Benson from Transit, Councilman Tim Henley, Alexis Versa from Transit, Brian Beckstrand from Transit, Carolyn Rodriguez from Summit County, Dustin Strange from Transit, Franklin Williams from Transit, of course, Kim Pilstead from Transit, Margaret Plain from Transit, Matt Diaz, City Manager, Robbie Smoot, Transit, Councilman Steve Joyce, Vinnie Nguyen from Transit, Jamie Danzy from Summit County. And that's who I have so far. If anybody comes in late, let me know.
Okay, it looks like perhaps we do want to give it a couple more minutes. I don't see Councilwoman Carson on this call.
I'm on.
It looks like she just joined.
All right, there you are.
Apologize, I had a little computer glitch.
Okay, and how about Councilman Chris Robinson? Present? Don't see him yet, so maybe just give it one more minute that we have a quorum.
It was difficult to connect this morning.
Okay.
Well, I have to say it was all on my end with my issue. I try to use my personal computer to stream in on, and then I can easily access my docs on my work computer. And I'm having problems with a frozen cursor on my personal computer.
Hi, can you hear me? This is Caroline.
Yep. Hi, Caroline.
Hello. Oh, hi. Chris said he doesn't. Chris said he doesn't know how to get on. Did you confirm he received a link? And are we sure it went to see?
I sent it to him yesterday, and he replied back that he got it. So I can send him another right now. It's the same URL that he would have received yesterday.
Okay, he confirmed yesterday he received it?
Yeah, he replied to my email and he said thanks.
Jed is joining too. I don't know if he had the invite, but I've just sent it to him.
Andrew, can you also forward it to Sarah Pierce? Can you forward the meeting invite to Sarah Pierce? Thanks.
It looks like we've got County Manager Tom Fisher on as well. Cindy, record that.
Matt, does Sarah Pierce need the public link, or does she need one so she can use her camera and mic?
Whatever's easiest, honestly. Doesn't matter.
Public link will probably be easiest.
Great.
1 second.
Sounds good.
Hey, Robbie, I just wanted to let you know I met your dad yesterday while waiting in line to get tested. Great guy.
No way. Ah, that's funny.
Andy, did you send Jed Briggs a unique URL also?
I forwarded him the one I had.
Okay, we might want.
Jerry, I got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, hi,
Okay,
Jed.
great.
Hi.
Looks like we have Scott Birmingham from Transit as well that joined.
Hey, everybody.
Hi, Bernie. How are you doing?
Yeah.
Doing good.
Okay, we just get Chris and we'll get started.
Jamie couldn't get on either, but she's just going to use the public link.
I found Andrew's email after all. I prefer that they be embedded in the Outlook invitation because it requires a little fishing, but I'll do better next time.
As will we.
It is a lot easier in the Outlook.
I
Okay.
see the small but mighty Tim Henney there. Good morning, sir. But I don't see others. I see Brian, and that maybe I'm not looking at the whole team here. Oh, I see Steve Joyce's high school graduation picture.
That's so I can hide back here and drink my coffee and eat my breakfast.
Okay.
Great. Well, it looks like we do have a quorum at this time, so we can go ahead and get started. I don't know if we have any members from the public that have called in, or Andy, if any have sent in any comments.
Sorry, I had to unmute my mic. Yeah, we have a few attendees. I don't see any comments so far. If you do want to leave a public comment, you can do so using the Q&A feature in Zoom. So you'll type your question, I will respond that I received it, and then I will just read it out loud for the public record. It's my understanding that we don't act on any of the public comment during the meeting, but I will make sure that everything that we receive, we will discuss or comment here.
And do you all have the letter pulled up from Deer Valley? I believe their intent was to have it read into the public comment today. That went to Kim Felstead and I think our JTAB reps.
I don't have it.
If not, I can pull it up.
If you could,
I'll look for it. Sure.
Yeah, and I
no
didn't get
problem.
anything from Deer Valley. Steve Joyce.
Okay, I found it. I'm going to read it. One moment, please. Okay, to the JTAB board members. Dear JTAB members, I am submitting this letter to you on behalf of Deer Valley Resort as we were recently requested by Summit County to offer letters of support for state and federal funding related to a bus rapid transit project for improvements along SR 224. While the resort agrees that this project is a critical step in furthering our area's ability to move more people quickly and efficiently and continue to improve traffic, air quality, and the overall transit experience for the region, we also want to take a moment to express our hope for additionally desired improvements to local transit service. As you are aware, Deer Valley Resort is one of the largest businesses in rural Summit County, and every day from December to April, we move thousands of guests and staff to and from our resort. While the current Electric Express provides a great service to connect Park City and Kimball Junction, the number of stops and connections needed to connect to Deer Valley are less than desirable for our staff and guests. From a staff perspective, we have seen ridership decrease from prior to the introduction of the Electric Express when UTA service ran directly from the Salt Lake Valley to Deer Valley Resort. While Deer Valley directly provides housing and transportation services to our staff and lodging guests, we further incentivize our guests and staff to take transit, including fully subsidizing intercity UTA bus passes for staff who live in the greater Salt Lake area and connect to the free Electric Express and other Park City bus routes as part of their transit trip. Whew. We also provide a significant amount of staff housing at Kimball Junction, which additionally contributes to the need for a reliable and quick transit connection. In an effort to increase transit ridership and efficiency, the resort would greatly appreciate more direct routes to Deer Valley without transfer and for dedicated transit lanes along both SR 224 and SR 248. While the BRT project can be a crucial step in furthering such a goal, we do not see this project making a significant impact alone, particularly in the early morning load-in hours when most staff are traveling to work. Such additional changes to the system would not only improve ridership and get more cars off the road, but would certainly increase morale and lead to increased attraction and retention of staff. We appreciate your consideration and hope you agree with our sentiments. Should you have any questions or would like to further discuss, I have included my direct contact information below. Thank you. And that's from Todd, the president and COO. And I forwarded it previously to be included in the public comment, but I will forward again because I know everyone's getting numerous emails every day now, even more than normal. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. Appreciate that. Andy, it appears we don't have any other public comments coming in.
Nope, I don't see any.
Okay. Well, then I guess we'll go ahead and move on to our consent item of acceptance of the JTAB December meeting minutes. Has been a while since we've had one of these meetings, and I know these minutes went out in March, so hopefully everyone had a chance to review them.
I reviewed them, but since I wasn't a member, then I'll abstain from voting on it.
Okay.
Likewise, this is Steve Joyce, same thing.
Okay. Is there an emotion to approve them from folks that were a member back then?
Yeah, I move to approve the minutes from December.
Second.
Okay, thank you. With that, we've got the December meeting minutes approved. We can go ahead and move on to our discussion items. The first item on the discussion list is the review of cost and performance of the 10 White. And there is a memo associated with that. Andy, if you could pull that up on the screen. Okay.
Is this the right one?
Yes, that's it. Thank you. So this has been something we wanted to talk about for a while, but because we didn't meet, it's been hanging out there for a bit. And currently what we're running on the 10 White obviously is not part of this discussion. This is from our past experience to date. Since the 10 White's inception, it is my understanding that we have operated 5 buses on that route during the winter. And for spring, summer, and fall, 4 buses were utilized up until the summer of 2019. At that time, a 5th bus was added to the peak to help the reliability, which it did seem to improve the performance on the route by 11% from the year prior. The cost of that bus was $80,000. And looking at performance data for that route from June of 2019 to February of 2020, during the winter season, we looked at this a couple of ways. So we wanted to see what kind of frequency were the customers actually experiencing in the system. So we took a sampling of stops and looked at how frequently a 10 wide express was coming by through those areas. And it did maintain an average of 10-minute frequency, which the more detailed data is attached as attachment A. During the winter on the inbound and outbound trips. In the summer, the white averaged 9.8 minutes on the inbound and 9.9 on the outbound. Spring was a little bit more challenging with 11.8 minutes on the outbound and 11.1 minutes, or I'm sorry, 11.8 on inbound, 11.1 outbound. So overall reliability data for that same time frame was 4.76% early, could definitely be worked on, and 28.87% late, which gave us an overall reliability of 66% on that route, which I think seems a little bit odd when you look at the frequency. And that is where I would ask that Robbie, perhaps you could explain the missed trip concept and how that impacts the overall reliability, but you would still see a frequency of buses coming through there.
Yeah, sure. So apologies if there's a lot of noise coming from my end. They're demolishing a building across the street from me, so timing. So the way this works is that on average, we're missing one trip per bus, one loop per bus per day. So that means that, you know, we put out a schedule and we say, excuse me, that the 10 wide is going to hit the, you know, let's say the Park Ave condos stop 100 and, what is it? I think it's like 100 and maybe 8 times a day or something like that on that direction. And we end up only doing it about 103 times a day. So we're maintaining the frequency of getting the buses to that stop at every 10 minutes, but we're just unable to fulfill every single trip that we have scheduled. So at the end of the day, in our data, we are making adjustments to the scheduled data to keep track and account for any of the missed service that we have, and then it's taken out of our data. Hopefully that makes sense, and if there's further clarification, I'm happy to take a shot at it.
So Kim, Carson, and then Tom Fisher both had their hands raised. So Kim?
Hi, thank you. I thought we had discussed, and I may not be remembering this right, I didn't have time to go through and look at old minutes, that we had decided not to do that 5th bus on there because of the cost. But then I was wondering, the question Kim brought up on the, excuse me, sorry, on the 66% overall on-time rate, is that for each one of those periods, or could that have been just for a couple of the worst periods?
That was the average
of the, as far as the date.
That was so the time period that we were looking at when we were doing this analysis was about May of 2019 up till about mid-February.
June of 2019.
So it was for the entire period. That was the average for that entire period.
Right.
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
As far as if I could respond to the decision to add the 5th bus and agreement on that, because I wasn't here for that, I cannot locate anything any minutes. A lot of the parties have changed who were involved, and so I really have not been able to answer that adequately, how that transpired or why. So at this point, I'm just looking at the data and saying, what do we want to do going forward with this route? Because obviously the 5th bus is important to keep it reliable, But, if that isn't the desires of all parties, should we look at moving the service to 15-minute service when things go back to normal? I mean, not considering what we're doing right now. So I think we kind of, at least from my perspective, all I can do is take it from this point forward and not adequately explain what happened in the past. And I apologize for that.
Tim, I mean, yeah, absolutely. Totally understand that. I think my question has to do with the added value of adding the fifth bus and the $80,000 we're spending on that. And I'm assuming that's an annual cost, correct?
Sorry, yes, I couldn't get my mic off.
That's okay. And so I guess my question, I mean, I understand that we're getting 11% increase in reliability out of that, which means it from a 10-minute frequency perspective, it takes it from a 55% to a 66. And of course, we have that missed trip issue that kind of drives that low reliability number. But from a ridership perspective, and from an experience perspective of our riders, we saw no difference in complaints or accolades, for lack of a different term, when we changed from 15 minutes frequency to 10, or with the lower frequency to the 10-minute frequency. And the added cost of $80,000 a year, are we getting the benefit out of it? Or in a time where I'm guessing once we get down to a lower agenda item where we're going to be looking for places to save some money, should we go back to that 15-minute frequency and not and save that money, or put that money somewhere else into our system? That's my overall question, and I think you're asking the same thing.
Yes. Does anyone else have any input?
Yeah, I'm raising my hand the old school way. But, it would help me to know if there's any data or studies that say that going from 10 minutes to 15 minutes will impact your ridership. I agree with, Tom, it's really about the experience. And I can only look at it through my personal lens. And I don't think it would make, much, if any, difference to me between 15 and 10 minutes. But I tend to use transit systems whenever I go places, and I never know when transit systems are set up for what sort of headways and what sort of intervals. And I think that providing something, the difference between 10 and 15 is, to me, negligible, but I could be easily swayed by some data if Caroline or somebody has data that would say, oh, well, you lose 30% of your ridership if you go from 10 to 15. But I'm not hearing that. I'm hearing everybody saying, what do you think? How do you feel? What's your lens that you look through? So if we're just doing it that way about what we think and what we feel and what personal lens we're looking through, I don't think it makes much difference.
Kim?
I just want to piggyback on that, Tim. I agree. We ought to see what type of data we could look at and see how does it match with other routes that we're trying to connect with, either, on both ends and in between. And so does it end up causing service issues in between if you have lower frequency? Or on the other hand, could it end up catching more people? Some people might just miss that 10-minute interval and have to wait another 10 minutes. I guess that could happen at, anytime they go to catch the bus. But, I would want to look at impacts there. Maybe we could look at that next time.
Yeah, definitely. We were to change the frequency, we would make sure all the other transfers would line up. I mean, that is very doable. And as far as data, at least from my experience in public transportation, 10-minute frequency is extremely generous, not typical. 15 minutes is kind of, customary. for a route like this. So the hard part is, you maybe want to go out to the public and ask what they would prefer. But when you go out and say, hey, would you want a bus coming by every 10 minutes or every 15? And they have it every 10 now, odds are they're not going to want to lose that. So I don't know that you kind of get a skewed perception in that it's a loss, even if it is doable.
Yeah, and they don't always know how to weigh that against the bill we're paying to increase that service either.
Correct. We did take a little survey because for spring, we were going to change it to 15-minute frequency after 7 p.m. and we got for a short time frame. And we didn't get any complaints. There was no concerns, but ridership, of course, really dropped off at that point. So we would probably be bound to hear more if we did it all day long initially.
Jerry?
Yeah, I wonder, Kim and Scott, if it would be worth looking at something between 10 and 15. So if you could lock in all day 90% reliability at 12-minute headways, running 4 buses, I'd just be interested in seeing what that looks like and then how that connects with the other routes in the system.
Right, and that's the deal I was going to bring up is it is important, the connections, once you move it up to more closer to 15 minutes. And if you have better reliability, then 15 minutes is great because then you're making the connections. You can time them and make those connections, and people won't care if it's 10 or 15 minutes because if it's 10 and they have to wait for their connection for 5 minutes, it's the same thing. So if we make it 15 minutes but make it more reliable that it's going to meet the bus that they need, then it's the same thing for people. The one thing I will say about it is that during the very peak times, the busiest times of the day, we might run into capacity issues. If we only have, say 4 buses running instead of 5 buses, you start running into a capacity issue with that frequency. So we might want to do 10-minute frequency at the very peak times during Sundance or something like that. That's just my 2 cents on it.
Tim?
Yeah, that's actually getting to, exactly what I was going to bring up is oftentimes I think that the system gets overloaded and we end up with buses stopped in traffic. So we miss those connections and the schedule kind of goes out the window anyway. So whether you're shooting for 10 or 15 or 12-minute headways, there are times and they're increasingly frequent times these days. And I know that running shoulder side buses could address some of that. And there are a lot of things that we're doing to address some of that. But if there were a sweet point within a range of 10 to 15 minutes that would help make connections, that would help address some of those peak time congestion issues, because we're missing them anyway. So if the reality is that we're missing those connections, we're missing those scheduled times, we're missing those headways during our most important times, then maybe we should be looking at building the headways and the schedule and the time around how we do make those connections in our busiest, most congested times, as opposed to looking at it from the other way when there's nobody on the streets. Hey, we can make all our connections on 12 minutes and make all these headways and be really reliable. Because it all goes out the window when we really want it and when we really need it. And I think that might be how to build the system from the top down instead of the bottom up. Just my 2 cents on that.
Franklin, looks like you have a question.
Just a quick comment. And the way we've advertised this on 10-minute frequency, the public wouldn't know whether we were running 4 buses or 5. They're just waiting for the 10-minute bus to show up. So again, it comes back to how we're messaging to the public what the frequency and the schedule is, and then being able to actually hit that reliably. Because that's the number one reason usually ridership drops off a route from prior transit research is, if it's unreliable, they're never sure when the bus is going to show up. they're not as likely to participate in transit. So by tweaking the frequency slightly, we could make decisions on how many buses are needed to meet that goal more reliably and cost effectively, and still be able to maintain the desires of the public and the reliability that we're shooting for. But they've never known whether we've had 4 or 5 buses on the route. They're just being told it's going to be 10 minutes.
Agreed, Franklin. And you know, I think that's probably something that we didn't anticipate going into this, that maybe we should change. Instead of marketing this as a certain minute of frequency, because I think that's fairly nebulous to the rider also, is that it's just high frequency, and then let our budget decision and our bus decision drive what high frequency means. And if somebody really wants to dig into that, we can tell them what high frequency means. But most people are not going to dig into that.
Okay, so Steve, did you have a?
Yeah, just a quick one. I think the thing we've got to do, though, is I agree with what you just said, Tom, but I think, you know, it also ends up impacting what you end up doing for bus routes. I mean, we just heard from the Deer Valley piece, and if the answer is, you know, gee, I'm out at the Ecker Park and Ride, and I go to the transit center and get on the White and take the White into the transit center and get on a bus to Deer Valley, and you know, every time I get off one bus onto the next is a 10-minute wait, perhaps. You know, I think you break your ridership, and so, you know, I am a little concerned about it, because we've kind of made this White bus the backbone and kind of counted on being able to connect into it and out of it. And even if you don't have to do that extreme of 3 buses, if you only have to do 2 buses, you know, one way or the other, still we're, you know, that White is absolutely critical to making our system work. And I like the idea of pick your frequency and advertise it that way at some level, or at least have a target internally. And the answer is, hey, if, you know, wintertime we need to drive to 5 buses and Sundance we need to drive to 6 buses or whatever, you do what you need to. And I mean, you guys are sitting there measuring this stuff day in, day out, but I think we ought to have a target of, you know, how long people are going to have to wait between buses. And just from what I'm seeing and hearing about disappearing buses, which I still don't understand, but I'll do that offline. It doesn't sound like it's easy to really, you know, pull in on one bus, get off and walk on the brown because, you know, walk on the White because we've connected them schedule wise. It sounds like there's enough miss in there to where, I mean, if 60% of them are on time, that's just 30% of them aren't. So I'm just worried about it because we've designed our system around that.
Caroline?
Yeah, I would just say that we do have a target as adopted in the Title VI program, and that's 90% on-time performance. And that's what we've put out that we're going to meet. And unfortunately, it's something's amiss right now.
Matt?
Yeah, this is Matt. My consumption of the marketing has always been that this is an express route, very predictable destinations, very limited stops. One of the greatest complaints I get around town, and it's all anecdotal, are these kind of looping routes through subdivisions where there's very little ridership. And so, you know, obviously we need to create the express as the backbone of our system that meets the demands, but I think some of this might be a marketing issue. We can market predictability, we can market limited stops, an express level of service. And, you know, to me, between 10 minutes or 12 minutes or 10 minutes and 16 minutes, I'll call it de minimis. I don't know if it's de minimis to the rider, but I don't want to, you know, I don't want to like just trip over that level of a detail when I think the commitment to the community has always been express, limited number of stops, very predictable, get in and out of town quickly. Those are my sentiments.
Kim? Kim, I think you're muted.
Sorry. I want to go back to the comment earlier that maybe moving it to a very reliable 15 minutes, you actually can improve the connections with those other routes. So I'd like to really see the data next month and see if that might be a possibility, because that would be a win-win.
Yeah, I like that idea. If the answer is we timed everything around 15 minutes and all of a sudden we started seeing that quite a few of our buses were arriving early because we were really kind of aiming at 12 minutes internally, and almost all of them got there by 15, and therefore, you know, the white shows up at the end point and you sit there and wait for 3 extra minutes because it came in early. That's cool. I don't mind early. It's late that's the problem.
Well, late's the problem, or early's not a problem if the bus sticks around.
Right. Leaving early is not acceptable.
Yeah, don't leave early. Get there early.
Okay, so I'm hearing a couple things here. Maybe we want to look at, is there a sweet spot somewhere in between 10 to 15 minute frequency that gives us some efficiencies and reliability? You know, what would the experience have been at 15-minute frequency? And I don't know, I'm going to have to get with Scott and figure out, you know, how we can look at that with the existing data, because unfortunately what we're doing right now isn't going to help us because we're 30-minute frequency. So if people aren't leaving early, we should definitely be meeting our connections.
So I don't know anything about this. I've been trying to listen, but for the newcomer, is the issue at hand that we're spending an extra $80,000 that may be wasted and that we need to make an adjustment here for economic reasons?
I think that is a concern that I'm raising. It could be part of the issue. I think there's other issues in regards to what is the right answer from the standpoint of making connections with other buses and ridership. But I'd also like it considered in the realm of cost as well.
Well, you know, I don't know how precious time is. Maybe it's cheap, but in my layperson's view, that we've spent quite a bit of time on this topic, and I'm still not. I mean, given that we have a system that is bleeding and is generally suffering from being lack of ridership and being shut down, I wonder if we shouldn't move on to something, because I'm still not able to. If you ask me to make a decision on something, I have no idea what you're asking me to do.
Well, so this is Matt. I think, to be fair, Caroline, correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to recall that the county had requested we discuss the white and the timing and the efficiency. So just, Chris, I think that's one of the reasons that we're here, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I think there have been some questions about the information coming out of the white, its timeliness, number of ridership, whether it was really 10-minute intervals or whether we were calling it an express. And so that's the reason we were revisiting the item, or one of the reasons.
I think it's good to revisit it. I just don't know what at the end of the day we're going to do about it today.
Yeah, I think the discussion has given staff an idea of how to bring back the issue for a decision point, as opposed to just a discussion of what's happened in the past, which really isn't useful anyway. We just need to move forward and come to a decision of whether we're going to spend the money to have a 5th bus, whether it makes sense part season or full season, that type of thing. And we need to drive some data to make that decision.
Caroline, did you?
Yeah, I just have a question. and we don't have to answer this now, but when looking at the data on the next page and it says it has the average frequency, Kim said that's at like a sampling of stops. So I'm just wondering, can we get more detail on that? Because to me, when I look at that, I assume that's like an entire trip from each end of line. And if a trip from end of line to end of line, for example, is 11.2 minutes, does that include the charging? Because the data that I'm looking at, I don't know that it averages to like that 66% on time. So I think it's more of me not understanding where the data is coming from, and maybe as staff, we can get more detail on the data and how it was calculated, and that would be helpful moving forward. So like I said, we don't have to address that now, but just can we put that on our list to look at?
Yeah, Caroline, I can explain this very quickly. So that is like how many minutes it was until a bus pulled into the Canyons hub, inbound, outbound. So it's not on time, it's just how many minutes until another bus showed up at that stop.
Okay, so from the midpoint, so from the canyons. And that's not actually headway, because if a bus is pulling in, it could sit there for 10 minutes, right?
At the canyons, they don't do any charging or anything, so they're generally in and out.
But does the data show that?
I haven't looked specifically at like the stop duration that's available data, but just from my experience riding it like every day, they don't generally stop there unless there's traffic or something.
I just think the dwell time, if this is a snapshot of the canyons pull in, pull out, I think the dwell time is important. And I just think as staff, it's something we should get more information and look deeper into the data on. That's all I'm saying.
Got it. Will do.
Okay, so I think we've got some direction to bring back some more data and some more options for next discussion. If everyone's satisfied with that, would you like to move on to the next agenda item? Not hear any nays. So there is no documentation for this next item. I just wanted to make everyone aware that we have an opportunity to purchase 14 electric buses in a joint RFP with Utah Transit Authority. They are going to be purchasing 30 buses of their own, and we would like to purchase 14. Obviously, this is something that we need to discuss, and it has not been finalized or approved. It's in concept at this point. 4 of those buses would be for the PCSLC Connect. So the current buses that are being run on that route need to be replaced, and they are diesel coaches. So in this agreement, Park City would actually purchase and own those buses, but there is coordination with UTA on a grant that was applied for together, as well as local match that UTA would be providing and Park City would be providing. So it's kind of a complicated funding strategy, but one that really gives us a lot of value for the dollar. And then UTA would maintain and operate those coaches. So it would be quite exciting to switch that fleet over to electric and not diesel going up and down Harleys. The remaining 10 buses would be to get through our VW settlement agreement. There's 6 buses in that agreement, and then but 2 of those 6 are actually for UTA, so that's 2 of the 4. And then we would like to add an additional 8 coaches to our fleet that are electric to ensure that we have reliability and enough electric buses to cover our needs for that. Currently, as you know, our experience has been not one-to-one on diesel to electric because of the technology challenges that we're hoping will become a thing of the past. But we have worked that into our fleet replacement plan that if we're replacing a diesel bus, we are going to have more electric coaches to do that given the current experience. And there's 5339 funds that would go towards that, 5311 funds. There's a grant that UTA received from Rocky Mountain Power. So just a lot of different funding sources overall.
Kim, this is Matt. Can you, I've read something about this. Can you also just summarize the financial aspect of the purchase and acquisition? So, for example, if you were to purchase 14 buses on the open market, what it would cost vis-a-vis what it will cost using VW, Rocky Mountain Power, and the federal money?
Yeah, the overall estimated cost for these buses is $14 million. And for our match from Park City, it would be 1.6 million. So it really is a good opportunity to maximize the dollars available so that we minimize the local match. As I understand, asking for this type of funding and the environment we're currently in with sales tax is pretty tricky, but it's an opportunity that we can piggyback on a larger RFP, get the volume discounts and the efficiencies from that. It's kind of a take it now or we'll miss it opportunity.
Are you saying that our effective cost is like $110,000 a bus or something, $120,000 a bus?
Yeah, you could look at it that way. The way it actually breaks out with all the different funding sources, not exactly. Some are funded at 65% and some of that. Yeah, it's not a fun detail to read through, quite honestly. But
what about the life cycle costs of these buses? Do they last longer and cost less to operate? And
well, I think a lot of that is still to be determined. And in fact, the federal government hasn't even put a life cycle on them yet. I'm anticipating they will at some point. Right now, it's 12 years for diesel coaches. And, our experience with our first fleet, we're too new into it to know what we could expect in the life cycle. But at this point, we would hope it's at least the same of 12 years.
I didn't understand when you said a BW or VW and settlement with a contract, nor do I know if Proterra is still the manufacturer of the new 14 buses. I understand there's some issues with Proterra. And I would think that in order to make this decision, we would need a lot more information, but on the surface, it sounds interesting.
Yeah, well, so the Proterra would not necessarily be the manufacturer of these 14 buses. It would be a competitive request for proposal because now at this time there are other players in the market like Gillig and New Flyer. So it should be a more competitive bidding process than the initial purchase of electric buses that we were obligated to go with Proterra because of the timing and what was available in the market and what had been through Altoona testing. But we have more options at this point. I think my intent of bringing it up in this forum, we have the looming exercise ahead of us of figuring out how we're going to divide assets when the county and the city separate their transit. And, at the same time, we need to purchase buses and move forward on certain things. So, I was hoping to look at the possibility of Park City funding the local match and not necessarily putting these new buses into that mix of how would we divide assets going forward.
So Kim, on that point, from the standpoint of the local money that would go into this, does the system under does PC Transit under its for lack of a better term capital match fund balances have enough to that we both contribute to? Do we have enough there to do the local portion of this, or are we additionally asking for more local money to be put into this, either from the city, Park City, or from both entities?
Well, that is something that I need to work through the details on our side with our current budget process and where we're at, given the new situation. But the intent was to find the resources within Park City and not ask the county for any resources for the local match.
Tim and then Jerry.
Yeah, well, this for me, I read our last item, I think, is looking at, transit budgeting into next year. And we're looking at a $5 million shortfall based on assumptions about hospitality and tourism taxes. And there's a way to meet that through, it looks like, federal grants of, and I'm assuming that we have a certain level of confidence that the $25 million transportation that's going to flow is going to flow to us and help cover, or maybe possibly cover, that entire gap. So Kim, to your earlier question where you were saying, this is a difficult thing to ask for in our current situation with no revenue coming in from our normal hospitality tax stream. I'd like a little further detail on that. And you've just added another layer of interest from my perspective, which is, saying we'd like to have Park City be the one that does the funding of this so that it, helps with future issues as far as separating assets and fleet. So out of that 5 million gap, where is Park City and where is Summit County? Or is that all combined and commingled? And then how does a $1.2 million local match fit into that $5 million gap that we're already looking at? And if you could, and I know we're going to get to it later, but maybe it's good to reference that using this discussion as the catalyst for the $5 million gap, the 1.2 million match, and Park City and Summit County, and how we come together on that. Or maybe Matt Dias, you can help with sort of that aspect of it, because you're looking at the Park City budget in a more holistic manner.
Jerry.
Okay. So a couple things I wanted to respond to Chris's question about life cycle cost. So there's been a fair amount of research, and this is a changing landscape. The electric bus manufacturers will tell you that the life cycle cost of the battery electric bus is significantly lower than the diesel bus. That has not borne out in actual service. And the reason for that is because it takes more electric buses to run the service, because you have charging time and then just the reliability of the electric infrastructure. But all indications are that as the technology matures, electric buses will be cheaper to operate over their life. We're just not quite there yet. They're probably pretty much the same, I would say, today. The second question that's coming up now about how this relates to budgeting, I wonder, Kim, and Matt, if it makes sense for, I think Kim is on the calendar for March 30th to present this issue to the Park City Council. And I'm sure the rest of the City Council will want to understand the financial part of this in great detail. And so I wonder if it makes sense, Matt, to have the City Council meeting, flesh out those details from the city's perspective, and then bring an update back to JTAB afterward.
That works for me, and I think that will also provide some time for us to work with the county staff about who purchases what, or even if Park City stepped forward and made the purchase, maybe there's a way that if eventually we had to shed some of these 14 to allocate towards Summit County, we could agree upon ahead of time some depreciated asset schedule, whereby if they were going to buy them in 4 years, it would be X amount of money. So I like that approach. I think it buys us some time. I like the sound of $1.5 million or $2 million for $14 million of rolling stock, top of the line, bleeding edge equipment. My follow-up question was going to be, does that also include the infrastructure? So does that also include the batteries and the charging stations? Because I know those have been an important component, and there's an offset there with not purchasing the diesel fuel. But, you know, right out of the gate, I hear $2 million of taxpayer money to get $14 million of equipment. I like the sound of it, but I agree. Maybe we approach our council, get some more details, and it gives us some more time to work with Caroline and Tom.
And just to respond real quick to that, Matt, it does include the batteries, and it includes the charger that would be at Salt Lake Central Station for the Connect, and then a rebuilding of the Kimball Junction Transit Center charger.
Caroline?
Sorry, I was intending to raise my hand after this conversation was over and just suggest, in the interest of time, we skip the ridership and move on. But I didn't mean to break into this conversation. Sorry, I was just meaning to raise my hand after that.
And then if I'm missing you on video, sorry, I'm trying to get used to this grid view so I can see everybody on screen. Brian, did you have something? I saw your hand a minute ago.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something about the lead time on these buses. There is a 12 to 16 month lead time, so there is some time to prepare to raise that money. I just wanted to put that point out there. So they're also, this is done through UTA, and they're definitely going to move forward with their solicitation. So that solicitation is going to go out in 2 to 3 months approximately, depending on how all this plays out. That agreement with the PCSLC Connect is going to move forward through UTA. So that's something to think about as well. And then I guess the third thing is the CARES Act. I do have a bit of information on that because I've been keeping an eye on that. The CARES Act is the $23.8 million that is coming into Utah to kind of make up for those shortfalls that you were talking about before. And I just received an email from UDOT stating that they're applying for that funding, and then they will distribute that after they have an idea of how much they're receiving. So we don't have exact figures yet, but I imagine that we're going to get a pretty good chunk of that. And there's a lot of things that are approved for reimbursement. So we can kind of keep that in mind as we approach this, the decision whether or not to purchase these buses.
Okay. If there is no other comments at this time, we could take up Caroline on her proposal to skip the ridership and go to the
Kim,
aisle.
I just wanted to make sure that that Kim and Chris were okay with that method of the Park City staff taking that back first, the method that Jerry suggested.
Well, I'll let Kim speak first because she has more background.
Well, I'm comfortable with you having that discussion. I appreciated Matt's comments of working with you and Caroline.
I'm fine with it.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. If there's no further comment on this at this time, Jerry, do you want to move to the ILA piece?
Sure. Let's see. All right, thank you. So it's been a little while since we worked on this ILA, and hopefully those who worked on it intensely for the months in the fall will remember what we have. I think where we are in the process is we're at a point where this is the formal presentation of this proposed amendment to the ILA is coming to JTAB. And I think what we're looking for today, if the group is comfortable, is a direction to then go to the next step, which I believe is submitting this draft ILA to the respective city attorney and county attorney for them to develop a final agreement to go to the respective councils. And I know that we have a lot on the agenda today, but if the group is comfortable, I'd like to just go through the memo that's in front of you now and highlight the 8 points of this draft agreement. And then we can go to the language if there are questions and discussion. And then after that, I guess I'm just looking to take the temperature of the group, whether more work needs to be done, if there are additional topics that need to be reflected in this agreement, or if the group is comfortable referring it on to the respective legal counsel. So the first item has to do with providing details about transit expenses in the monthly billing. So that was that was the issue that we really wanted to understand and get comfortable with, first of all. And I appreciate the work of all the staff on both the county and city side, and the work of the JTAB members to really understand the detail of what goes into the expenses. So what we have put in the agreement is that as part of the billing, which we would propose to move to a quarterly cycle as opposed to monthly, the city would provide a detailed report of expenses to be reviewed by the staff of the county prior to preparing a final invoice. And that's really what the parties have been doing for the last almost year, is looking at those details and scrubbing any items that are inappropriate or mistakenly applied out of the invoice before it's submitted. So I think the group is pretty comfortable with that process. It takes quite a bit of time to just go through every line item, and if we don't know what it is, run it down and figure it out. But I think it has accomplished the objectives of the group, which is to have full transparency and accountability for what's going into the bill. The second item has to do with preparing annual budgets, and we're already off schedule just because of the COVID issues, but Park City's on a July 1st fiscal year, and so the parties agreed in this draft that the cycle of budget would be April and May. So submitting a draft budget to JTAB for transit services in April, and then a final budget being approved in May, which then would be would go back to the Park City Council to be incorporated into the city's final budget process. We're at a point today, and it's no surprise, where things are changing weekly, and the city did go through the process of preparing a budget, and that work was done in really February and March, but all of that is now obsolete and really not worth spending time reviewing. But on a normal cycle, in a normal year, that would be the agreement of the parties to submit a draft budget in April, final in May, then go back to the city. Let me pause there and see if there are any questions or concerns about those first two items. If not, I'll just keep moving along. Okay, the third item has to do with vehicle replacement. And since the initial agreement in 2006, the county has, as part of the monthly billing, paid for a portion of the local match for vehicle replacement. So that money has been put into a capital reserve account that's maintained by the city, and that money is still sitting there. It's by the end of this year, I think it's expected to be about $1 million, $1.2 million in that account. And so at such time that the city and the county seek to reallocate assets, that would be one of the considerations in that process. Item 4 has to do with a similar contribution for facility replacement. There are two components to that. One is basically lease of the use of the facility for vehicles that are used in service that the county's paying for. And then the other is payment into an asset maintenance fund. Again, this agreement would not change that practice and how those accounts are being maintained. It would just maintain the same approach that's in the original agreement. And item 5 is a new requirement. The parties suggest that they both maintain at least 3 months of transit operating expenses in a reserve account. And we see today just how important that is, that we have some cash to keep things rolling and pay payroll in the event that there's some kind of a crisis. Item 6 is a new item that I think is important to get right. So in the past, there was not a clear requirement in the agreement about when and how service was approved by the JTAB, which ultimately the county is being invoiced for. So this formalizes that process and indicates that changes in route alignment, frequency, hours of service, like we were just discussing on the Route 10, would be reviewed and approved by JTAB prior to implementation. So we have clear accountability to the JTAB for the level of service and the costs. This agreement has a term of expiring December 31st of 2021. And the feeling there is this item, I think, came out of the joint session of the City and County Council, which is we don't want this we want this agreement not to be a permanent one, but to be a bridge agreement with the expectation that the city and county come up with a new form of regional transit governance before that December 31st, 2021. And then item 8, everything else is left intact. So I can entertain questions now about that.
Jerry, what would change if we were to sign this agreement now compared to what you're doing now?
We are following the billing section. As I said, we're already not compliant with the budget, but that's a special circumstance. We're following the vehicle replacement, facility replacement. Item number 6, which is formal approval of changes in route alignment. That would be a change from the past practice. So there would be more formality and more advanced review compared to what the parties have done in the past. And then the reserve fund would be a change from what our practice is right now.
Mm-hmm. What are you seeking from this meeting? Are you wanting feedback? Are you wanting to come out of this meeting with approval to take the draft to respective councils for approval and signature?
So
Caroline is either telling me to stop or she has something to say.
I would like to chime in and first of all, I just want to thank everyone who worked on this. It was a lot of work. It was hard work, and I appreciate the increased transparency and the cooperation that has gone into all of this. It was, like Jerry said, it was very time and labor intensive. I think there's still some things that we need to work out, and I would suggest that our strategy is we have 1 or 2 more meetings with a smaller work group that I had suggested before that would also look at governance, but should we should use that work group to go over the draft as it stands now, just one or two more times, and hone in on some of the details and outstanding items we have before it goes to our attorneys. So I would just respectfully request that we can get that work group moving a little bit before it goes to our attorneys. I do think it's in a really good form, but I think we just have, like I said, a few more things to tighten up.
I'd like to chime in on one of the items that maybe this, to piggyback on what Caroline just raised, and for future further vetting and exploration, or maybe it can be answered now, you know, maybe staff who's worked on this and put item number 6 in place. You know, I look at JTAB, and the acronym stands for Joint Transportation Advisory Board, and advisory boards aren't normally bodies that approve things. So that word, you know, review, terrific; vet, terrific; approve, I sort of wonder about wandering into the realm of approval with an advisory board. You know, recommend, vet, review is all terrific if you're an advisory board. And I just like a little further explanation from staff as to why we are in the approval business if we're an advisory board.
Good question.
So I'll take a shot at that, Tim. As the staff were working through the terms of this agreement, there were a number of times that issues came up, just like we were talking about earlier on the Route 10, where there was a question about when was the decision made to increase the number of buses on that service, and thereby increasing costs that show up in the invoice to the county. And there was a feeling that if there's not some more formal process for JTAB to review and approve those things, then the county's at quite a disadvantage, because the city then can unilaterally make decisions about levels and costs of service, and the county's in a position of just having to pay the bill. So I appreciate what you're saying, and certainly JTAB could not usurp the respective council's authority to allocate budget and taxpayer dollars. On the other hand, I think it's fair for the county to say there ought to be some review and approval process before they just have to pay the bill.
Thanks for that explanation, Jerry. That does make sense, and maybe we just have the wrong title on this group, and but that's a minor thing. But that helps. Thanks for the clarity.
This is Steve. If we're going to give this back to staff to work on some more, as Caroline asked, then probably don't need to address it here. But when I look at number 11, the reserves, it just seemed unusual to me that we basically weren't building the reserve fund until December 31st, 2021, at which point that's the exact moment that this agreement expires. And so it seemed kind of weird to be building up a reserve fund that you didn't have to fund until the day you were done. And hopefully there would be some entity down the road that would be picking up from this, but who knows what that financial situation looks like. So it seems like if you want a reserve fund, you need to get it funded sooner than the end of the contract.
That's a good point. So I think the JTAB has a couple options now in front of you. Caroline has suggested that it be delegated to the working group that's going to be discussed later, or the group could say it's good now and let's go ahead and move forward. So just putting it back to you, what's your pleasure?
This is Steve again. I guess I would just, before we decide that, I would love to know you know, what do you guys think is wrong with this? I mean, I read through it. I didn't see any real issues based on, and again, kind of like Chris, I haven't been involved in all the discussions getting here, but is there a set of issues that, that you guys can throw out and just give us an understanding of why it needs to go back?
Yeah, I can do that. There's a few issues. So number 3, regarding the vehicle replacement fund, that's actually not our recollection of how we were to proceed. We were waiting for a few things from the city, a full vehicle inventory, plus we had requested an accounting of purchases and dispositions by year for all vehicles. In addition, we asked to understand the position of the city when it comes to if we decided to stop paying into local match as of 2020, would that leave the city sort of in a lurch and not able to perform on their intended procurements? Or so do we need to cut it off, or do we need to continue to contribute to that local match as the county? In addition, we need to come to some understanding. We don't have an accounting of the capital reserves for all the vehicles that we've been paying the match money in, the replacement cost into over the years, or a resolution of what could happen with that when we part ways. And previously, Chris had also requested that this agreement speak to parting ways when it's over and what that could look like. We don't have a resolution on the Kimball Junction Transit Center, and we also need to discuss about whether we need to revise the agreement when it comes to federal capital grant financing, which is touched on in the previous ILA, but it's very limited and sort of vague in scope, and we've encountered some difficulties and miscommunications. So I think that also needs to be resolved before we have a new agreement.
Sometimes it's better not to ask the question, it sounds like. That's quite a laundry list.
Yeah, sounds like there's some more work to go. No.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, and if I can chime in on that, the origin of this amendment was to address the billing issues. And so there was a lot of concern about not having transparency or accountability for the expenses related to transit operations. And I think that if you're looking to have this amendment address all of the everything, then it's a different kind of agreement. And the question I would pose to the group is whether it's important for you to put the lid on and put to rest the concerns about billing, so we have a formal agreement that sets out how the parties are going to work together over this interim period of time. Or do we try to work on an agreement that takes care of everything that the parties are going to have to address going forward? And so you can probably tell my recommendation is let's lock in an understanding about billing and accountability and transparency of information in the short run. And then there's a parallel piece of work that needs to get started as soon as possible to understand larger governance issues.
And Jerry, to follow that up with, and I think looks like Matt and Kim also want to speak, but I tend to agree. I also agree with Caroline's list that those are other things that we've agreed to work on. But I think settling the issues of billing, annual budgeting, and then the transparency issues of this body are very important to lock in, because I think we're all in agreement on how those are going to move forward. And then I think we could further agree that we need to come back with another amendment that deals with those other items. And quite frankly, since our joint meeting, we've all been waylaid by an emergency that has stopped our work on all of that. So I think that we can make that commitment to each other.
Kim?
Well, I guess I'm piggybacking on both of their comments. I think we have these other items that are those governance issues that are in a side parking lot. And I don't want to forget them over there. I think some of it, I mean, we can actively continue to work on. I probably have the most concern with number 3 and the vehicle replacement fund, because I see that as something current. Do we continue to pay into something that we haven't seen accountability on yet? It's just, you know, we understand the purpose and the importance for it, and it provides us with something too, but that would be one area I would like to have staff work on.
I'm sorry that the version of this document that's in the packet doesn't have all of the exhibits. And I think as a follow-up to this meeting, we should send that out to the whole group. So there is in the draft agreement that the working group had an exhibit C, which is the vehicle inventory by individual buses with VIN numbers and so forth. And there's also an exhibit E, which is the accounting of the vehicle replacement contributions that the county has made so far. So both of those items were expected to be included in this agreement. It's kind of a snapshot of where we stand right now, but I understand that's important information that needs to be included.
So I think that piggybacking off the comments that have been made, I think we can sign an agreement now. I would just like what we sign now to be more explicit on a roadmap for where we're going, and not just say, as you say in number 7, that it's the parties will have a replacement agreement before December 31, 2021. And when we get down to, and so on this topic, I think that we should, rather than take this right to the attorneys or to the, maybe the attorneys have already weighed in, but to our respective councils, I think that we should have whatever this small group entails, and I'd like to be involved in editing the agreement from the county's point of view before, and present the revised agreement at another meeting.
Then Chris, I'm not sure we can get it done by December 31st, 2021.
Maybe not.
I'm just teasing.
The thing that I don't understand, and it's like when we get down to where we're looking at numbers at the bottom half of the agenda, is whose budgets are those, and who owns what, and where do we fit into this big picture? And even on the discussion of, do we buy 14 new electric buses and it's $1.6 million, or at the end of the day share or whatever, where does that, what does that mean?
It all depends, Chris, on whether you've got your personal checkbook ready or not.
I don't keep a checkbook. No, I just mean,
yeah, we're gonna, I think you're gonna understand more of that as we go through that.
You know, where what I think I understand is that the city has a transit district and has a budget for it that Jerry said has now been upended by the COVID-19, and that we get billed for things and that, for services, and that's what I understand the status quo is basically. And I think implied in that is that maybe, to Kim's point on number 3, maybe we're paying into a fund, or maybe we own a percentage of different assets, and I see we're being charged for amortization at different useful lives of different facilities and things. And at the end of the day, it would be interesting, I mean, I assume this entity has a balance sheet, but I have no idea what portion of it, if any, the county has any ownership in. So we're talking about another effectively 2 years of kicking this can down the road without having any real understanding, at least by me, and I'm new, so I don't know that. I mean, I'm not new to this. I've been on Get JTAB before, but it's always been a mystery to me as to really how we fit in, other than that we're buying services. But do we, you know, when you buy services for most people, that isn't a part of your payment for services, isn't purchasing equity in the business. I don't know if we have any equity or not, but I don't understand. And so this is going to give us more transparency on how you bill us for those services, and whether or not we are just advisory or whether we have an approval right under number 6 for changes in routes and things. Those are all details, but I just don't understand it. And I think from our joint meeting, it was sort of clear maybe things have changed where, you know, where the city has felt like that they've had plenty to manage here and don't want to manage anymore. And so I think it's pretty important that we,
suggestion.
yeah.
Chris, you brought up earlier that we have limited time, and I suggest you get together with your staff and answer some of these questions and get some clarity. You guys are the ones asking us to go through this exercise. I think you should spend time with your staff and you know, cover some of this basic groundwork so that we can move on.
That's a good suggestion.
My comment, this is Matt. You know, I will just piggyback off of what Jerry and Tom said. I think that it would be an understatement to suggest anything but this, you know, this additional iteration of this ILA is a huge step forward in additional transparency, forecasting budgets, allowing Summit County to predetermine expenses that are kind of authorized in terms of shared expenditures or not authorized. I mean, there's a whole host of additional levels of transparency, predictability, accountability to Summit County. I don't suggest it's perfect, and what I don't want to let happen is let perfect be the enemy of good. But I do feel like it would be somewhat of a disservice to not memorialize, you know, soon here in the near term, this probably years worth of work with our new transit team, with Tom and with Caroline, and a lot of the progress that we've made together. You are right, though. There are things about our future, our joint future or our independent futures, that will not be resolved in this kind of interim update of the ILA. And I'll harken back to what Jerry said. I'm not sure that was ever the purpose, because I don't think that this can do that. This ILA cannot, you know, adequately contemplate or forecast what it would look like if we consciously uncoupled, or the county expanded services and they were the manager of their own domain and the city was the manager and we hooked up in a bunch of different places. But it is a really good interim step of progress along the way. I guess I can commit in terms of my staff, maybe we could take one more run at this, and with the assumption that by next month's JTAB that we need to bring closure to kind of memorialize where we are working together, accountability to you, under the understanding that this absolutely can't solve all of our issues and was never intended to. So anyways, I think we're all sort of circulating around the similar compass here, but eventually we do have to sign something to say the stakes have changed in the last 7 years. Let's memorialize where we are today, and then the future we're going to have to work on together. And I don't think this document's going to be able to do all of that at once.
Well, I'm not suggesting that this document is going to solve all of that, but I would like to have recite some of the things that we're going to do, other than just to replace this with a new one at the end of 2021. That has some steps in it of the kinds of things we're going to do in the meantime. And it might be that, and I don't want to belabor Tim's point that I should go back to the staff. And so I think we should move on from this because I thought that was a good point.
Okay. If everybody's in agreement to move on, any other comments? All right. Our next agenda item then, I believe, not sure if Caroline has something further to say about the transit governance work group assignments at this point.
Well, I was just hoping that we could assemble a work group to talk about the governance moving forward and what that looks like in the short term, and then in the long term as we potentially part ways. And I was envisioning staff and elected officials from both sides, and it could be the same as JTAB. I just wanted to give our elected officials the opportunity to say they have time to do this or they do not, or the desire. And I envisioned that it would be at least bi-weekly meetings to keep the process moving.
I think that a meeting with our staff, Caroline, and a review of the past and of the agreement could result in a proposed red line that wouldn't take months of bi-weekly meetings. I think a single meeting would be able to put something on the table that would be available for review. I don't think that the kinds of things that I'm discussing are not ones that we need to convene a large committee on for a lengthy period of time.
So I guess I was thinking of this in the bigger context of planning for the future, not just the amended ILA, but if people think that's not useful, then we don't have to do that.
Well, I think.
But it was in the oh, go ahead.
Well, what I thought I heard is that after a year's worth of work, that everybody would like to sign an ILA that memorializes the good work that's been done, and do that fairly soon. And so the changes that I would make to the ILA would set the stage for the going forward kinds of meetings you're talking about.
So
Chris,
this is
I
Matt. Sorry, Kim, go ahead.
Go ahead, Matt.
Well, you know, and Chris, I hope you don't feel like I'm being argumentative, but I've just got to harken back. Like, that was not the intent with which we entered into this ILA discussion. It was to reaffirm and memorialize where this major public service is operating at today, and the paradigm with which it operates under, and the new level of transparency and accountability. It was not to come up with a process to determine kind of the future of whether or not we uncouple, whether or not we stay together. And so I'm worried about all the time and effort that went into that and getting mired into trying to morph this iterative update into something else. But secondly, I do think that's a worthy process, and I do think that came out of the joint councils meetings that we had at the Richens building. If I recall correctly, I'm going to ask, sort of the elected officials to confirm, was that when we left that meeting, we left under the auspices that the county was going to take the lead in effectively forming a group, which I think is what Caroline's sort of trying to do here, forming some type of a governance group to look forward on different types of operations or governance models that could be considered for the future of Park City Transit or Park City Transit 2.0 or 3.0. And so I see these as distinctly separate things in order to just keep the process moving, keep the forward momentum going. I see these as two different things.
I'm not suggesting to the contrary. I think that the part that's lacking in the current arrangement, it relates to the county receiving or understanding, and maybe we already do, what assets we have in the existing system. What is that? And when you speak about intent, the intent on which this may have started at the beginning, you talk as though intent is written in the Constitution. We can change our intent anytime we want. We're at a juncture when we're signing an amendment to an agreement. It's not going to take forever. To the kinds of things I'm suggesting are not going to be difficult. And so I would just, out of time, for time's sake, I would like for us to be able to regroup on our side for as a new member to meet with staff and go over it, and likely to present for joint consideration a red line of the draft attached to this staff report.
You know, I weigh in from Park City elected side and say I've been part of JTAB for quite a while and have sure understanding of the history of how we got here and what we're doing. And that's absolutely fine with me, because you know what? We have an existing agreement. It works. We're already, we've made adjustments in actual practice and have improved on the existing ILA. And if you guys want to delay signing and creating a new ILA, that's fine. You know, I don't think it goes anywhere. This is all being driven by your list of grievances and your requests and your desires. So take your time, do what you need to do. We've got a system that works really well. We've got an agreement that gets things done. You don't like it, figure it out.
I agree with that, Tim. I think that's why I ask if what in the existing agreement is already being done. And it sounds to me like that you've made a lot of course corrections. We do want to memorialize it, and that's why I don't think it's an unreasonable thing to suggest that we go back and do as you said, meet with our staff and get educated, and then decide whether we like it the way it is and we want to propose a change. And if you don't like it, we live under the one we got. That's not that hard.
I think that would be productive time for you. And after this meeting, I will forward to the whole group the most recent draft document, which is in the packet, but also all of the exhibits that I think will answer most of your questions. And I can just say very, very briefly, the county does not hold title to any of the vehicles, nor does the county hold title or an interest in the buildings. However, the county has been paying into funds both for vehicle replacement and for building depreciation. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a balance of about $1.2 million in county contributions to vehicle replacement. And there's a balance of, I think it's in the neighborhood of $300,000 for building replacement. And that information is all in the exhibits that go with this agreement. So I'll make sure you get those. And then if you need more information to have this meeting with the county staff, please let me know.
Does you're saying, as you just described, that the county's equitable interest, be it title or not, is limited to what you just described?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, that's helpful to know. So why don't we go on to the next item?
Okay, I believe Councilwoman Kim Carson wanted to speak to a conversation that occurred recently with Wasatch County.
Yes, I just wanted to briefly update you, just let you know that we did have an initial conversation with Wasatch County after the study that took place last fall. We had never had any type of follow-up communication with them. And I would say just overall, you know, we're trying to improve the quantity and quality of communication that we have with Wasatch County, because we have, there's a lot of growth coming to that area, and we really need to be at least having conversations about regional issues. And so they were very open to that. And they just gave us an update on where they were. There were no main conclusions, but we did talk about having further discussions with at the staff level and starting to explore some different regional governance models. So it ties in with the discussions and work that we'll be having with Park City. Just wanted to make sure you were aware that we had had that conversation.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone that has a question about that, or?
Yeah, my question, and forgive me, is there a next step, or is there anything that Park City Transit, and I know we've intentionally asked Summit County to kind of take the leadership position. Is there anything we need to be doing or should be doing, Kim, or that's come up?
No, this was just the meeting with Wasatch County was, again, a very preliminary meeting, mainly to get a recap of, their study and where they stand. They haven't implemented any of the transportation taxes, but I believe they sometime, this could change all of that, but they'll be considering those. But I think, on our end, we would like to have the governance work group and talk about starting to gear up meetings. Caroline? I think that's what you were talking about, but Chris thought it was meetings, I think, related to the ILA.
Yeah, it was related to the overall governance, but I did think we could use the first couple of sessions to discuss specifically the ILA, but it sounds like that's not the desire of the group, and that's fine.
Okay, do we have a schedule for those, or maybe an idea of when we want to start? I know we're all, I know on our end, our capacity has been stretched, but again, this is something we've got to continue working on. So we'll put together a schedule, but maybe starting the second week of May.
And I think that's what I was asking. And I was also wanting to confirm that the governance work group members were the same as JTAB and in terms of elected officials. And I didn't know if that was too heavy a workload, or if some other elected officials wanted to participate. And that's what I was sort of trying to ask about also.
Why don't we have each party just confirm who their representatives to that work group will be, and if we could all do that within the next week. So Caroline has that information.
Does anybody have thoughts on the role of Park City in a governance work group at this stage? Again, going back to our last meeting, my understanding was Summit County was going to explore different models of governance and do a fair amount of work before bringing that to any other joint group.
Yeah, I'm a little confused right now myself, and because I think we're talking about two different things. I don't think we're prepared yet to have governance conversations in a deep way with Wasatch County, but at the same, we are talking to them, and I'm not sure I want to bring Park City into that yet. Maybe I didn't listen close enough. Caroline, can you? And if we're talking about governance in regards to how we operate with Park City Transit. Those are two different subjects.
I think, well, my understanding was we wanted to create this work group to keep the dialogue open about both of those items.
Which work group? First, just so I'm clear.
Governance, yes. A work group between Park City and Summit County, whereby we would discuss all of these issues and put forward a roadmap for what the next 2 years look like, or I'm sorry, until 2021. Wow, that went really quickly. What it looks like in the immediate term and then in the long term. And we would discuss everything from how this uncoupling looks, how to divide assets potentially, and also then we would also start talking about what an overall agreement would look like moving forward and how we would partner or participate. All of those issues, I thought the point of this group was to check in every 2 weeks and talk about that.
I agree with that, but I'm not sure what that has to do with our discussions with Wasatch County right now, which is what Kim was reporting on.
No, Mike, that was strictly an update. I wanted to let them know because, you know, we're having conversations with them about governance. And I know that I had talked about it it was just really an information only piece, Tom.
Okay.
I don't, you know, I know that the two staffs will be having some conversations, but no, it's not related to this at all. So I'm sorry if I created that confusion. I just wanted to keep Park City abreast of conversations in case they heard it in the press. I know they pay attention to our meetings, and I did share that with council a couple of weeks ago. So it was just for your information only.
My question is about regional transit and a new governance system, and that is separate from conversations with Wasatch County. My understanding after our last joint meeting was that Summit County was going to take lead on a governance work group and do a fair amount of work on that subject before we convened as a joint group.
I agree with that, and that's where my confusion came in, is that we are working on the regional transit piece, and I don't believe we're ready to bring forward anything to a joint group yet.
Okay.
Well, I guess I'll say my confusion is when Caroline asks for who are going to be the representatives from Park City on the task force or work group that's looking at governance for a future ILA addendum. I go, well, I'm not really sure who Park City's representing.
And Tim, that's where I would disagree with the results from the joint meeting, is that I think we did agree to work on that together.
I heard Chris pushing really hard to have participation from Park City. He said, well, yeah, of course you don't care about, the governance in the future because you guys are making all the calls. And I don't recall there being any clarity. I mean, I think the clarity was, we could sever the obligation for Park City to be the service provider and for Summit County to use Park City as the service provider as a step in future governance, which would then free up Summit County's ability to look at a lot of different service providers as one possibility. And we talked about different possibilities, but I'd like clarity from Park City staff on what your understanding is as far as our participation at this phase. And I'm talking about this phase, like Chris needs to get up to speed on a whole bunch of stuff. That's a first phase. That hasn't happened. That can happen before we come into a meeting like this and Chris, verbally processes for a long time on different topics. That's not efficient use of time. That's not good use of time. So there are things that can be done to lay the groundwork. And I would say, we said the groundwork for a discussion about governance needs to be laid by Summit County. That's my clear recollection. Staff want to weigh in on that?
This is Matt. So I have a similar recollection that Summit County was going to take the lead on next step governance discussions, kind of 2.0. I can't see a scenario where if you asked for some staff assistance or some support that we wouldn't be willing to support and help discuss and work on that together. But to Tim's point, and again, it's not to be argumentative, it's just I do recall a little bit of pushback with our folks saying, the situation sort of works for us now. We're the provider. It seems like a lot of work to change things up moving forward, but we understand your desires and we're willing to support you in that and be a good partner. But it's not something that I felt I wanted to allocate, at least administratively, resources towards, because those resources would then be taken away from working on the transit system improvements that we're working on. And that was the genesis of my recommendation, that from an administrative standpoint, Summit County takes the lead. It's your desire to look at kind of different methods and operating paradigms moving forward. And I can't imagine if you asked for our assistance or to participate that I wouldn't have a quality staff member or a technical professional to help in that, but it was really step one, yours to take the lead.
So it sounds like what we're talking about is the difference about when we bring something and bring it back to a larger group. And if that's the difference, I'm okay with that.
Okay, I specifically remember talking about representatives from each party and that we would be doing the undertaking, but if you don't want to participate in those discussions at this time until we have a recommendation.
No, I don't. I'll speak up here. I don't think that's the case. I think it's So I think we will end up playing a big role in the regional transit, whatever that happens to be, and certainly want to participate in that. I just like to make sure that we're kind of separating things. One, as Matt said earlier, for this particular ILA amendment, what we were trying to do and what I think staff went off and did was really clarify and fix the billing issues that we have. I think if we had all the exhibits that were here, we would all be a lot more comfortable with the kinds of things that were being asked. I think the one thing that we were looking for the county to take the lead on the regional piece is, every time we get together, there's a whole discussion about, hey, there's really about 4 or 5 or 6 different kind of transit mechanisms for regional transit, of how you either have subgroups that are owned in one overarching group, or whether you have one regional group that owns all the assets. And every time we get into there, it's like, well, there's a whole lot of work that says, go off, research all of those, find some good examples of what might fit here, get at least the pulse of what Wasatch is interested in doing, Salt Lake's interested in doing, that kind of thing. That's a lot of work, and it needs to be done before we put 30 people in a room and start talking and accomplish nothing. And so I think that's my difference is, are we willing to help? Sure. Are we willing to participate, especially from an elected official standpoint of where we want to see policy going, and what we're willing to invest in? Yep, absolutely. But from a standpoint of own it, get it going, and there's a huge amount of work there, I thought that's what you guys had kind of signed up for. Is that fair, Kim?
Yes, I think that's fair.
And I agree. I don't know if you said Tim or Kim. I keep hearing
Kim.
my name.
So that was a Kim thing, is I just want to make sure that's where we got out. So I think the interesting thing is that I don't think we're far apart. I think we're really close on all of this stuff. I would love to see, and I'll try to wrap all this up so we can move on. It sounds like between staff and at least Chris and maybe other people in council, you guys are going to go back and look at the ILA amendments, maybe give us some red lines, and we ought to be able to knock something out pretty quick because we're not going to try to turn that into an entire governance discussion. So hopefully we see something next JTAB meeting that we can actually turn over to the lawyers and let them run with it. Second piece is, I mean, we're all coping with a giant emergency right now, so I'm not sure how much time and attention this is really going to get, but we need to start making progress towards the what comes next piece. And that's, I don't think it really, honestly, I kind of disagree with you, Caroline. I understand where you're going, but to start talking about how do you split up assets and all that kind of stuff, I don't know how to even begin to have that discussion if you don't know where you're trying to get to. Because that's steps along the way to get to somewhere. And if we have no idea what the somewhere, if we all agreed, for instance, that one regional organization was going to own everything and run everything, then that's what we move towards. If we're going to have little transit groups that are owned by municipalities with some overarching connectivity, then that's what we move to. And I don't even know how to start having a discussion about, you know, how do we split up assets and work and all that kind of stuff if we haven't even taken the first step yet towards what do we want to be when we grow up. I'm done.
Okay. So it sounds like there's maybe some more meetings that need to take place with the county before we explore that topic any further. I did want to just say, in support of Matt's comments, certainly we would be of assistance and help wherever we could. And when we do get to that point where we break up, so to speak, I think there needs to be some kind of work group that continues to coordinate on transit going forward so that we serve the county and all the counties well. So maybe that group morphs into something down the road further, but I don't know if anyone has any additional comments they want to make on that topic, or if we wanted to move on to the COVID response.
COVID.
All right, COVID, it's the topic of every day, right? Okay, so in the March packet, we did have a quick summary of what we were doing at Park City Transit to address COVID, and you know that entailed cleaning the buses on a much heightened schedule, and we've continued to do that when this initially started. And I'm sorry, Andy, you could just pull up the PowerPoint that I sent you that's not in the packet for this piece. I'm just speaking to the COVID, and then I'll go on to the staffing piece.
Got it.
So initially when this started, the CDC was not recommending masks, so we were not providing them for operators, but we were allowing them to wear them if they wanted to. But since then, you know, that's changed, so we have been providing them with cloth masks. And additionally, we have got our first prototype, what I'm calling an operator sneeze guard, installed on our bus, which is a plexiglass barrier that blocks the front of the bus off from the back of the bus. So patrons would need to board in the rear, but it does have the ability to swing so that the operator can board patrons that need to utilize the kneeling of the bus on the front door when that is needed. And that has been well received by the operators. I think it makes them feel, you know, that they are cared about and have an additional protection available to them in this very difficult time where they're performing a much needed function. So there'll be more of those to come. And I really appreciate our vehicle maintenance group getting on that so quickly, and appreciate Matt's support certainly in having that option and being able to act on it in real time. So we're continuing to try to address the changes with the situation. And as you know, we reduced our service yet again on Sunday, and so far, so good. It looks like we're moving about the same amount of people, but we're utilizing less buses to do it. And we'll just keep monitoring that going forward. You know, the concern would be, is that going to cause a social distancing problem, using less buses to move the same amount? So far, there's been no reports of that, but we will continue to watch those numbers and address it if that does become an issue. So what I have here, this PowerPoint was not in the packet. We can send it out with some of the other documents that we've discussed sending to the group. just kind of wanted to have a big picture discussion about, where do we go from here once things maybe start to come back a little, knowing that they'll never be the same in some regards. So, Andy, if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide for me, please. Okay, so just to remind everybody, because there's been a lot of changes in a short amount of time, because of COVID, we ended up switching to our spring service, which is a reduced service level that we do every year after winter service. But we switched 3 weeks early, and that was effective on March 18th. And then we saw the drastic drop in ridership that was occurring, and made a decision to once again reduce our service to not utilize too many assets out there for the riders that were there, but also to protect the public and the operators. And that happened on March 24th. And then yet on Sunday, we once again reduced to really just absolute bare bones. And that's where we're at this time. And that was on the 19th. Hey, Andy, if you can go to the next slide. So kind of give you a picture of what that means. If you look at our normal winter, we're running 585 service hours. We always try to obtain 160 operators to do that. We got to 153 this year, and we're able to provide that service. Certainly there was some overtime. And then our spring service, which it was our naturally planned spring service before all this happened, is about 385 hours. And so when we went into spring 3 weeks early, we still had 153 operators at that time. And we had made the decision to honor our commitment to the seasonal operators that had anticipated they would stay through April 12th. We utilized those operators. They helped us with the additional cleaning of the transit center and of the buses, and were very engaged in helping us address the situation. Then from there, after April 12th, we let, we had in between, we had another reduction in service. And about that time, we had 140 operators just from folks that were leaving earlier than anticipated before the 12th. After the 12th, we dropped down to 96 operators. So that's our seasonal force that had planned to leave anyways. And that's where we're sitting as of today. So, and that gets us down to 229 hours of service daily out there. So you can see that's quite a drastic drop in what we had anticipated we would be running at this time, and a drastic drop in operator needs. Is there any questions on this slide before I move to the next? Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide, please, Andy. Just, I'm sure many of you saw this. These were the notices we put out when we reduced our service. So this is the first notice where we went from winter to spring service early. The next slide, we'll have the second layer that we went to, the first reduction in our spring service. And then the following slide is basically where we're at now. So quite a lot of changes, and kudos to everyone that helped communicate those changes to the public. Andy Stevenson had a huge role in that, and Scott Birmingham had a lot of work ahead of him making all those adjustments, and as well as Franklin and his group, just to make this happen seamlessly for the public. So I want to just give a big thanks to all of you for your help. I know these were very difficult tasks in a short amount of time. And if you can go to the next slide. So looking at the stabilizing of the situation at this point, what do we need to run these various layers of service? And like I said, we had always have tried to obtain 160 operators for winter and got pretty darn close this year. Typically, we would want to have about 122 to run our spring service as normal. The first reduction in service that we ran, 93, would be ideal for that, and the second reduction, 80. So right now, we're sitting at 96. We have more than we technically need to run this level of service. But as you know, it takes at least 4 weeks to train an operator from the day that they show up on the property. It can take anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks to recruit. Granted, the market has had some drastic changes recently, so that maybe gets a little easier now than it's been in the past, but it's just not a quick on and off switch is kind of the point I'm trying to make. So it's a tough decision that we need to make, where we want to sit on our staffing levels and what our service expectations would be when things start to ramp up again. Are there any questions on this slide before I move to the next? Okay. Andy, if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. So here is what I'm proposing. I would like to be able to maintain the operator headcount we have now of 96 operators, even though that's about 16 more than we need. I think that gives us the ability to go back to our shoulder level of service. If we did want to run that, that's not summer level. That's, not arts festival. That's just off-season level. And it obviously we would find some savings in training and recruiting, but we also have wages that we're incurring in the meantime while we're not utilizing them to their fullest. And it also puts us in a better spot to prepare for winter service. Although, I'm not anticipating we're going to need 160 operators this winter, because I think the impacts will be felt, and we will just have to assess best we can what our winter is going to look like going forward. So I just wanted to have some discussion around that and get the group's thoughts. It looks like Tom's got his hand up.
So sure, Kim, I really appreciate the thoughtfulness you put into this, because this fluid situation is not easy to plan for or react to, as you guys have had to do, and you've done a great job. Couple of the things that I just want us to be thinking about as we talk about this is, you brought up the social distancing piece that is going to remain into the stabilization phase, probably even into recovery, that we need to be concerned about. So, right there, we're 5 months out from where we are right now, and probably beyond. So that's going to have an effect. You couple that with sometime in May, we're likely to come out of our stay-at-home. If not in early May, which, what level of service do we think we need to have in order to have our community be able to run correctly or in a way that we want after that from a transit perspective, especially in dealing with our workforce and the folks that are transit dependent. And then the last piece of that, and I didn't write a note down about it, and I've forgotten what it is. So I will let somebody else speak, and while I think about what that was.
Okay.
Kim, can I chime in here?
Yes, please.
So we've had some discussions, Tom, about what that next level of service looks like as we come out. And I think our best guess right now is that it's not back to business as usual anytime soon. And so it's more likely that going from this greatly reduced service level back to a shoulder level service is probably the next step. And maybe that could take place in, optimistically, that's a June or July kind of situation. We don't know yet whether summer events are going to happen. And
that was my third thing that I forgot about.
Yeah, so obviously,
while you're talking about that one, Jerry, just so without getting in front of our stabilization group too much, I will start to lean out on this, because I don't think anybody else is really ready to do that. But I want the discussion in the community, and especially amongst this group, to start talking about it. Social gatherings or large gatherings, as that affects our events season, how it affects our small group business or group business that the chamber will talk about a lot. You know, the governor's plan talks about 20 or less for a period of time. And I don't know what that period of time is. I don't know if anybody has that crystal ball. But even then, stepping up to 50 groups of 50 being able to gather is a very limited amount. And we don't move beyond that from the governor's plan perspective, probably until that September or October timeframe. At least that's my interpretation of the plan, and what I'm hearing in other circles that I run around in. So I think that's the planning factor right now. If it's better than that, then we turn something on better than that sometime during that time frame. But I think we have to have a planning factor. Sorry, Jerry, to interrupt you.
No, that's really helpful. So I think that reinforces the thinking at the city that it's most likely that we're able to ramp up really to a shoulder season level of service, or something maybe even reduced from that as a next step through the summer. And then it's probably going to be a scaled back winter service for this next season. So that's kind of how, you know, just generally we're seeing it. And it goes back to Kim's recommendation to try to hang on to, you know, the operators that she has, so that that ramp back up process can be much quicker. So if you're basically down to a bare bones staff and you've got a fully staffed for winter, you probably need 3 or 4 months at least in order to start getting the people to show up to do that work. So I think that what she's recommended here will enable her to go back to a shoulder season service relatively quickly. But then, you know, winter is going to be the same challenge. We're going to have to start staffing up for that in August, even if it's a scaled back winter.
Yeah, something else to consider in the staffing, it's, you know, we may have a scaled back service level, but if we are having enough ridership, we could actually have to do like double headers just to get the social distancing space. So it's a really hard thing to nail down what we could expect and what we need to be prepared for. So I think we all need to understand it'll take some time to adequately address it, but we're doing our best guess efforts right now to be as ready as possible, given the variables that change daily.
The other great thing is that our whole transit industry in the United States and world is dealing with the same issue. So there's going to be a lot of best practices.
That is true. Although I would like to say I think we're leading on a lot of those. So they might be looking to us.
Can I just add one more piece of information as it relates to budget and expenses? So we have not gotten final word, as Brian said earlier, from UDOT about how much money could be available as part of the CARES Act to support transit, to pay people's salaries, to keep them on staff. We hope to have that information in the next week or so from UDOT. So we've had some communication. Kim has with the FTA Region 8. And as Brian said, we've also heard some from UDOT. So hopefully we'll have an indication of that. And if we have all of that, we can bring it back by the May JTAB meeting. But for example, one of the questions is the cost of maintaining extra staff going to show up in the invoice to the county? And if that cost of keeping people on staff is something that can be directly offset with CARES Act funding, then no, it shouldn't have to show up in the invoice to the county. So those are some things we need to sort out in the next few weeks before we can really tell you what the financial impact is going to be on the county. But we hope to make it small and have the savings related to this reduced service show up in the invoice to you.
Okay. Are there any questions or concerns about proposed plan? Right. Hearing none, sounds like it's definitely something. Maybe we can come back with some more information in May about what we're able to achieve through the CARES Act. I don't want to take too much time if people are ready to move forward, because we do have Jed on the line to talk about budget and kind of where the city's at on forecasting and strategy. Jed, hopefully you're still hanging in there with us.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay. Andy, could you go to Jed's slides?
Is it okay, Andy, if I share my screen?
Yeah, go ahead.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. Jed Briggs, Budget Manager for Park City Municipal. I just wanted to go over real brief some of the things that we're doing in terms of projecting some of the kind of areas in terms of sales tax where we see major shortfalls, and caveating all that with it's really difficult to project next fiscal year. We're doing, I think, the best that we can, and we're taking a lot into consideration, but it's always tricky, and we are kind of in that plan for the worst, hope for the best kind of scenario for ourselves right now. I did want to just briefly mention, as we're talking with our council and we're talking with the community, we do have some guiding principles that help to kind of set the framework for what it is that we're doing. Looking at this as almost like a natural disaster versus an economic recession. This hit so fast for us, and I think Jerry alluded to the fact that initially when we're putting our budget together back in February and even the beginning of March, we were kind of going through the regular process, and then the floor kind of fell out from underneath us, and we had to transition and adjust really quickly. And so we had to put together, I think, some plans for council to look at in terms of shortfalls for this fiscal year as well as for next fiscal year. I just briefly wanted to mention how we're bridging the gap in the general fund. This is what we've been mostly talking with our council about. When you look at a gap, we're looking at about $4 million in a funding shortfall. You could tackle it in a lot of different ways. For us, we're trying to do a balanced approach where we're looking at operational expense reductions. We are looking at delaying capital projects, and we're also looking to eat into our fund balance to the tune of $750,000 in terms of the general fund. This shows kind of the entire general fund and what it is that we're looking at in terms of shortfall. If you're looking at sales tax there, you see that for this fiscal year, we're seeing $3.7 million in a shortfall. And so that's what we're trying to bridge that gap. And then we're working towards that FY21 starting July 1st through June 30th. That's our next fiscal year. So we're in the process of doing that as well. Something to take note of is we do have a recession plan, which is in our policies, and it gives us different thresholds and different criteria once we cross those thresholds in terms of getting more severe in looking at expense reductions or hiring freezes, capital delays, that type of thing. So that's something that has been part of our policies and has been part of our decision-making process as we go through this time right now with these economic uncertainties. And again, something that Jerry alluded to is our budget process and needing to have a budget adopted soon. We have to have council adopt a tentative budget in the first meeting in May, and then we have to have a final budget by the last meeting in June or before July 1. And so that puts us in a really tough situation in trying to put budgets together for next fiscal year, because we really are very uncertain in terms of what the revenues are going to look like and what the ski season is going to look like. And so what we're talking to our council about and what they've agreed to is potentially opening up the budget again in late summer, early fall, once we get a better sense of what the financial situation is going to be like for next fiscal year. We are taking a budget to them that's going to be a reduced budget, but it's more of a provisional budget at this point. So we still are going through the process of looking at cuts and looking at areas that we can save money, but we're not in the worst case scenario putting a budget together like that, because I think it'd be really hard to do that at this point. We're also not being completely optimistic either. So we're trying to have a very kind of balanced approach to how we look at the budget for next fiscal year. And that includes transportation, obviously, as well. This is our 2021 projections. If you look at the first two, transit sales tax, resort tax, those are two sales taxes that go into our transportation fund. And right now for next fiscal year, you can see that we're projecting about a $5.5 million shortfall. And that's a large chunk of money that we got to make up. And we don't have necessarily the plans in place to do that. But we're just kind of looking at the numbers right now and then looking at different areas in which we want to kind of bridge that gap. You'll see two different projections on here, and that has to do with federal grants. And as Jerry said, if we got some CARES Act stimulus funding, then that could easily bridge the gap if we got, $5 or $6 million there. That is our hope, and that's what I think we're going to work toward. And Jerry will probably talk about that a little bit more as we kind of go through this brief presentation here. Normally,
hey, Jed,
yeah.
Do you mind if I just mention something for the on your list there, those regional transit revenues? We need to note that those are all of our sources, correct? So the 3/4 that are transit related.
Right. And we are, working with Robbie, we are projecting that revenues go down based off of service levels going down for next fiscal year. So that's why you're seeing that gap there.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
On that point, Jed, is there somewhere in this presentation where the amounts of money the county will be paying are forecasted?
I would say, but I will go through, we have another slide here that I'll kind of explain a little bit more in detail, the county contributions. So let me get to that. In fact, before I do that real quick though, I just wanted to show how we got our sales tax projections. So this is for next fiscal year. So starting July, if we were to normally budget kind of a monthly budget and kind of phase that by typically when we would see those revenues, that's what it would look like in the normal estimate right there. And you get 8.6 million. And then what we've done is said, okay, so if that's the normal, what % of normal would we predict? And then we've just gone through and given percentages based off of when we think the economy is going to open up. And so we start out slowly, July, August, you got 25, 30%. And then, slowly ramping up. We get to the ski season, December, January, we're at 60, 70%. Those numbers might be high. Again, we don't really know. But then by the time we get to June, we're almost back to normal. I think you can definitely poke holes in this methodology. But what this says is we're down about 36%, I believe, from what we would normally receive in terms of the sales taxes. So this would be the transit sales tax, and then we have a little bit of resort sales tax going into the transportation fund. And so that's where we're seeing this deficit here. So this shows a little bit of the revenue profile. We have our own municipal mass transit tax. We get about $3 million a year. That's what we consider to be the first quarter. The fourth quarter, again, I think Jerry talked about this briefly. This is something that's new for the city that we started getting back in July. And so that has been kind of buoying up the transportation fund. If we're looking at, kind of reserves, funding, and extra additional resources, that's a nice revenue source for us right now.
And for and for the county council's benefit, that fourth quarter, you'll remember the first year of that, when you enacted it, was retained by Summit County, and then it was distributed per formula afterwards, which is why the Park City is getting a portion of that.
Yes. And then we have the service agreement, which we talked about quite a bit earlier in this meeting, which is about $7 million a year, give or take. And then federal grants, which again, we receive federal grants every year. We're working towards getting that funding for capital projects and a little bit of operations. And then we're gonna, I think, focus a lot on the CARES Act and stimulus funding. And then I just wanted, oh, go ahead.
That on the 7 million is that the historic number? On this previous slide, like maybe you showed 7 and it went down to 5 or something.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
Down 8.5 down to that included other things than just the 7 there. But there's the approximate 7 million is that the old number or the new number?
That would be more of the old number. So that wouldn't include reduced service levels, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah. That's traditionally, I guess, what it would be. And again, traditionally, I mean, within the last couple of years, because that number's ramped up a lot over the last 3 or 4 years. So, yeah. And then I think this is my last slide, actually, where I haven't really been focused on this in my role at the city, and I've been working with Robbie and Jerry, just trying to understand all these different quarters. But kind of as Tom was talking, you have the fourth quarter there, which is the newer funding. We also have the fifth quarter on the right-hand side. And I think Tom was mentioning earlier in a different meeting, potentially using that for maybe relief funding or something along those lines. That's received by the county. The fourth quarter is split, and you see those 3 different areas where the city receives some and the county receives some. The third quarter, kind of going backwards here, is received by the county, as I understand it, and then that helps supplement capital projects, I believe, at the city through the COG. And the first and second quarters are the one that are part of that kind of the invoicing, the monthly or quarterly invoicing. And so the city receives the first quarter, and the county receives the first quarter separately. And then the second quarter we receive through that agreement through the ILA.
Yeah, that's.
I know this is all very complicated.
Yeah, the second quarter is retained by the county, but by agreement we decide how it's going to be expended.
Right.
And that agreement is the ILA, Tom?
It is not the ILA. It is a separate ILA that was signed before we put those the second and third quarter on the ballot in 2016.
Okay, I remember that.
Okay. Jerry or Robbie, anything I'm missing on this? Again, we're trying to kind of dive into these a little bit more.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think you covered it well. The unknown, as I mentioned earlier, is this CARES Act funding, and hopefully we'll get a handle on that in the next week or 2.
Great. So that's it for my portion. Again, we're looking at a shortfall and trying to figure out ways to kind of bridge that gap right now. The big thing that we're looking at is federal stimulus funding. But we'll have to kind of dig deep and look at operations, capital, and all that kind of stuff in order to kind of figure out how we close that gap.
Chad, Steve Joyce here. I may have missed this, but you're talking about revenue primarily here. And what I haven't seen is, you know, if we have service levels that look more like our shoulder levels and our shoulders look more like our current, you know, what do we have for an expense forecast going forward? You know, I don't know how much of our expense is really variable. Obviously, things like buildings and stuff like that don't suddenly go away, but I would assume that certainly driver counts go down, but even bus maintenance and fuel and all that kind of stuff goes down. When can we expect to see that as part of the input?
You have asked the literal $1 million question right there.
I guess I would throw that to Jerry and Kim. I mean, we're in the process of looking at all of the different expenses and looking at all the, because it's not just operations, it's capital on top of that. And I don't think we necessarily have a clear vision yet, a clear roadmap for where we want to go. Right now, we're kind of saying, okay, here's kind of the nut we got to crack with the shortfall in the revenue, but I don't know if we necessarily have said what the service levels are going to be yet for next fiscal year. I think we're still trying to figure that one out.
Agreed.
Oh, go ahead, Kim.
Oh, I was just agreeing with what Jed said about where we're at on those costs.
Just in broad strokes, Steve, typically you can assume that your direct labor costs are going to be 65% of your total operating expenses. And so if you just look at headcount levels, that's a pretty good indication of what your, at least the labor side of the operating costs will be. The other bulk of that are vehicle related costs and primarily fuel and electricity. And again, you can look at your service miles and see proportionally what those kinds of things should be costing you. The wild card in this is that we are retaining more staff than is absolutely necessary to run the levels of service. So our expenses are going to be higher than they would be otherwise. All of the ongoing administrative costs of running the city are going to continue. So the overhead costs will be there. The good news is because of CARES Act, we should be able to offset all of that with federal funding. And so the net expense to the city and the county for operating this service should be quite a bit lower. We just need to put all those pieces together and bring back to you.
Are there any other questions about this strategy and forecasting?
How does Tom, how does the county know what to budget for, given this information, as far as meeting the calls to pay the service invoices?
We are in the same boat as Park City is right now. Park City is planning their budget for July 1 through June 30 of the next budget year. That is their next step, which is to figure out what it's going to look like, and that's why they've described in Kim's past discussion, or in Jed describing this, that they are going to come up with a preliminary budget and then perhaps look at amending their budget like 1 or 2 months into the year. I think we're comfortable right now that our adjusted revenue estimates, that we can continue to pay our bills to the system. I know that Jed and Matt are comparing notes on that in order to ensure that. But, you know, we talked about the budget for transit for Park City's next fiscal year. That's very important for us as we go into our budget process in June. And of course, we'll have more clarity on revenue as the year goes on. Excellent question. I don't have a complete answer, but I think we're comfortable right now. If our revenue estimates continue to go down, that's exactly why we need to be having this discussion.
But wouldn't this work that Jed and the city is doing, wouldn't they're going to be trying to plug in a number for revenue from us, and we ought to, as soon as possible, know what is expected so we can figure out if we have the money to pay for it or find the money.
We agree with their revenue estimates as of right now.
No, I know their revenue estimates, but how does the revenue estimate affect what we pay?
It doesn't. What more affects what we pay is what levels of just those things that Kim just briefed ahead of this, which is what levels of service we decide to put in place for the rest of the year.
Well, that gets to Steve Joyce's comment, the question about what does the expenses look like? Because I think we need to estimate what that level of service is that we're going to be getting so we can estimate what we need to pay.
That's exactly right. And we've already been having those initial discussions as staff to understand that we need to get to the understanding whether we need to change routing, what is it that we need to do, and that's our next step. I think we're all describing what the next step is.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Okay, hearing none. Jerry, do you want to talk about the CARES information? And Andy, if you could go to that slide.
So I think we've covered most of this. I can go quickly. In the CARES Act, there was significant funding, $25 billion for public transit. And as part of that, there is about $22 million for rural transit in Utah. So it's a significant chunk of money. That compares to what would be available in a normal year of about $6 million that would flow to Utah. Typically in a normal year, about $2 million of that $6 million comes to Summit County and Park City. So there's a robust level of funding available, and we have just been waiting for some direction from UDOT about when and how we can access that money and what sorts of documentation will be needed. We expect that shortly. So it looks like, gosh, there's 3 times what a normal year's allocation would be, but these are very different times. And so this is expected to be one-time funding. We'll need to make this last through the crisis that we're in. The funding is going to flow through the normal formula grant programs that are in place. So this will flow through the Section 5311 program, and UDOT administers that for the rural communities within the state. There are some differences in this new funding that are worth noting, and the first one is that it is 100% funding. So typically under a 5311 grant, we would be matching that grant for with 20% on capital and 50% for operating assistance. Those matches are not required. The second thing worth noting is that the kinds of eligible expenses are pretty open, and so we're able to pay administrative leave pay or the hours it takes to keep people employed. We're able to pay for ongoing operations in the light of reduced sales tax revenue. So all of those things that we're most concerned about in transit look like they'll be eligible for reimbursement. So that's I guess the good news for transit out of the CARES Act. And as soon as we get the direction from UDOT about what information they need and how much will be allocated to the Summit County Park City area, we'll go to work on a plan to make use of that and then let you know what the net impact is for both the city and the county.
Okay, any questions? Okay, we are over our time, so we appreciate everyone staying with us. I've heard a couple items already for May's agenda. The next JTAB meeting is planned tentatively for May 19th. Sounds like we want to come back to the ILA, get an update on the CARES Act, staffing levels, service. And I certainly will send around a draft agenda as well for any additional items that we may not have covered that we would like to discuss in May. Sounds like we probably need to have a long meeting in May as well. Thank you, Tom, for recommending we add time to this meeting. It certainly came in handy. And with that, if there is nothing further, I would motion to adjourn this meeting. I did want to make everyone aware on the JTAB that there was a request for an update on our Proterras, and that meeting is following this meeting. And inadvertently, some of you were left off the invite, so I apologize. I just caught that and sent it to you. You're welcome to join us if you have time. If not, we can update you later as well. So there's nothing further. Everybody good with adjourning?
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Rest of your day.
See you guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Cindy, do you want me to just leave this open for the Proterra update, or do you have a separate Zoom meeting?
We do have a separate Zoom meeting. We just, where it's not a public forum, we didn't know if we should start over there.
Oh, right. Yep. Okay. I will go ahead and end this meeting, and then Cindy, I will share the recording with you.
Thank you so much.